Hi, everyone, and welcome to Articulate Writing Skills Workshop, Writing for the Future, the rhetorical secrets that prepare you for the HSC and university writing. Thank you so much for joining. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognize the continuing connection to land, water, and culture. I'm currently on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country of which you're on and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future. As we share our knowledge, teaching, learning, and research practices within the university, may we also pay our respects to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. This is a quick outline of what we'll cover in the webinar tonight. I will quickly run through some housekeeping, and then we'll hear from our wonderful academics who are very eager to share all their secrets about writing and argumentation. Tonight's webinar is delivered in partnership with the disciplines of English and Writing, as well as Studies in Religion here at the university. And it couldn't have been possible without Associate Professor Susan Thomas, Dr. Benjamin Miller, and Dr. Christopher Hartney, and the willingness to share all their expertise, knowledge, and insights on all things writing and argumentation. We're very excited to cover this topic as part of our Articulate Talk series this year, particularly as it was requested directly from high schools, and we very much appreciate all your contribution and ideas in designing the talk. We hope everyone here finds tonight very helpful and for your upcoming assessments. Susan, over to you.
Yes, it's lovely to be here with you, and thank you all for being here. So you can tell I've been playing around a little bit with Microsoft Copilot, but I often wonder what Aristotle might have made of the digital age, and certainly this age of generative artificial intelligence. So that's why I'd like to think about what can an ancient Greek philosopher possibly still teach us about writing. So I wish I had $1 for every time someone asked me, can you just give me a formula for how I can write well every time? What's the secret, they say, to great writing that will succeed in its purpose every time? And I don't really have a science or a formula to offer you, but there's a theory that I want to talk about today, and it's called rhetoric. But before we delve into this, I want you just to take a moment and to think, when you hear the word rhetoric, what comes to mind? How would you define or describe rhetoric to someone else? Where have you heard this term? Is it usually positive or negative? Do you use it yourself? How do you use it? What does it usually mean? So you can even pop your answers in the chat if you'd like to. So classical or ancient rhetoric, as it's sometimes called, was developed by Aristotle in the 4th century BCE. And the goal was to find all available means of persuasion in a given situation. And the method still is the rhetorical triangle, but it was then too, because Aristotle invented it, of course. And I'll be talking about these in more detail. But Aristotle's theory has been adapted and applied for well over 2,400 years, but it's not always called rhetoric. It can be called many things: intuition, logic, lots of things that it's called. But when I think about rhetoric, I think of it as the art of persuasion, or in the more modern era, the art of communication, because our goal for writing now is not just about persuasion, as it was in the ancient Greek agora, when you knew who the successful philosophers were by how many literal followers they had walking around behind them. Now, we still use tablets and we still have followers, but we think of followers on social media, but the principle's the same. The people who are effective get the most likes, the most followers. And I want to talk about today a little bit about, what sorts of writing or how we can write in a way that gets the response and achieves the desired effect. So this is what I show people when they say, what's your best advice for someone who doesn't know much about writing or who wants to be a better writer? It's the rhetorical triangle. And Aristotle came up with 3 appeals: logos, pathos, and ethos, these good Greek words. Logos, usually meaning shorthand for logic, but really anything that can be based on fact. Pathos, emotion, we hear people say, oh, you're so pathetic, or it but literally it comes from the ancient Greek meaning emotion. And ethos, of course, would mean ethics, but we think about it in terms of credibility. So we think about the credibility of the speaker. we think about not just the emotions of the audience, but what sorts of appeals can we employ in our writing to make people want to read what we have to say, to make people interested, to draw them in, so to speak. And our message, of course, is through logic. What are we basing this on? And so I like to give people the analogies of walking into a shopping center and suddenly people race towards you with little brochures or pamphlets. They're wanting you to buy something. What is the first thing you think about? You think, is this brand credible? Can I trust this person? What are they saying to make me want to know more about it? Again, to draw me in. And it's the same in advertising, sales, but the same principles apply to our writing and how we can make our writing interesting and effective. So Aristotle didn't he didn't leave us a recipe, and he didn't give us a particular formula for how much ethos, how much logos, or how much pathos, because he said it depended on the situation, on the moment. There's this other wonderful Greek word, kairos, meaning the opportune moment or the opportune time. So part of good writing is all about the timing. It's about knowing your audience, being effective, making sure you've done your homework, and making sure that what you're saying is credible and believable, and that people should invest their time in listening to what you have to say. Or when we think about academic essays, that people want to read all the way to the very end. You've stimulated your reader that they want to know more about what you have to say. They're interested in what you have to say, and they'll stay with you until the conclusion. So when I think about what Aristotle would have made of generative AI, for example, I think he would have seen it as just another means of persuasion in a given situation. So rather than saying, oh, we shouldn't be using generative AI, or yes, we can use it for everything, the trick, and I think what Aristotle would have said, is how can you use it in a way that that benefits your writing the most, that makes it better, that doesn't make it look like it's canned. It's pretty obvious if something's just been pulled right from a language generator. But what are some ways that we can think about using it as a collaborator? Because that's one of the things that's so important with your writing, is to talk about your writing with other people. And sometimes you might not have a friend or a family member to bounce, or a classmate to bounce ideas off of, but you could sit down with Microsoft Copilot, type in some ideas. But the trick here is using it ethically and responsibly and logically, by learning and figuring out what it is that you can trust it to do and what you can't trust it to do. So for example, it's not going to be able to tell authentic stories about your background that might pull in an audience as a pathetic appeal, or an appeal to pathos, as we see here. It can rattle off some facts, but sometimes it does make things up. It can hallucinate. So you want to be careful, and you want to always be in control of the information, no matter what source it's coming from. But personally, I see it no different as asking a friend for help, or asking someone else to read over it and give you feedback on your own writing. So some examples of logos you can see here. We're looking at facts, statistics, data, precedents, pathos, images, storytelling, personal experience, examples. And whereas your credibility rests on your expertise and training, your professional experience, any notable achievements you might have had. But really, that last one, responsible use of source material, and this would apply to artificial intelligence technologies as well. It's fine to use them as long as you're using them responsibly and acknowledging their use, just like any other technology you might use with your writing. And when we think about the rhetorical appeals, I wonder if there are any Taylor Swift fans in the audience. I'm a huge Swiftie. And I think one thing that has made her so popular with her music and with her songwriting is the way that she has combined these three appeals so effectively. So she writes about things that are believable. She bases her music and bases her catalog on real people in some cases. She uses lots of storytelling. She can weave a story. She knows how to present it, even down to costuming, the way that she can use humor. Lots of different, and if you went to the Eras tour, you would have seen this on full display. But she has the credibility because she plays instruments, she writes her own music. She's been, there have been no scandals on Taylor Swift thus far, but it's been wonderful to see her develop as an artist. And some people say, well, why is she so successful? And that's just one example of an artist that can blend these things together, these elements together so seamlessly. Okay, so I want you to keep thinking about rhetoric. I want you to keep thinking about generative artificial intelligence. And I'd like for you to, maybe think about Taylor Swift or your favorite musical artist and how they use these appeals and how we can look at other artists and musicians, because that's also a composition, that's a form of writing. And we can think about how successful people make these appeals work. But if there's one thing that I can leave you with, it's that rhetorical triangle, and think about, how your writing, how you would map your writing onto that triangle. And it's now my pleasure to turn over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Ben Miller.
Thank you very much, Susan. Hello, everyone, and it's really lovely to be here. It's great to hear Susan's introduction to rhetoric. Susan and I have been teaching for over 10 years now in English and writing, as it's known now, at the University of Sydney, helping students understand the rhetorical situation of academic writing and how to leverage all of these techniques and strategies and ways of thinking that Susan introduced just a moment ago to create engaging, persuasive, and really effective pieces of writing. We've taught these units from first-year students all the way through to postgraduate students, and have even helped some of our colleagues understand their rhetorical situation. It's a really powerful and useful way of thinking about communication, and we're really happy to give you this brief introduction today. I'll be applying some of these concepts and ways of thinking to HSC writing specifically, thinking mainly about the essay that you might take home and work on your own and in collaboration with a teacher at times to submit as a form of assessment, but also that other tricky anxiety-producing kind of writing that occurs in an exam situation where you might have to write an essay on the spot under time pressure in an exam. And believe it or not, I was once a New South Wales HSC student. I went to a rural high school down on the south coast of New South Wales. I thought I was a great writer. I think I was pretty good still when I think about it now, but I really sort of came to confront all the things I'd learned about writing when I came to university, and I've spent the first part of my career reflecting on that experience as a HSC writer. So I hope I can share some insights and wisdom with you today. And for those paying attention, that was an ethos appeal to my own credibility and authority to be able to share this information with you. So firstly, let's think about that rhetorical situation that Susan just outlined for us, and try and align some of the features of that rhetorical situation to this situation of a HSC essay, where you're given a question, you need to do some work at home, you will receive some help in class, maybe some feedback along the way from your teacher, but you can think about this question you've been asked to answer and the resources at your disposal to help you answer that. And starting at the very top of the triangle, you as the author, what do you have available to you to help you create a persuasive and effective response to the question? So I've just mapped out here things like your experiences, your understanding, the critical skills you have, your ability to, say, analyze a written text, your knowledge of different pieces of information, your personality, maybe even your ambition and the goals you have in mind for where you want to go and the future of the world and so on. And the reason I think it's useful to flesh this out a little bit is that things like the demonstration of critical skills and demonstrating your understanding are what we typically think the author needs to do in a HSC essay. But very few people think of their experiences, their personality, their ambition, these other features that they possess as individuals as really important things that can help you achieve what you want to achieve in a HSC essay. Arguably, I would say, drawing on those other aspects that you have available to you as an author, your own experiences, your own personality, are the things that actually help you stand apart from the typical essay that a lot of markers get to read and a lot of your peers will sort of think of as the usual essay. Now, you as the author, you get to map all of those intricate things out about what you can demonstrate, what you do well, what you can share, and so on. But you need to put this in relationship with the message or the text, and here that's the essay. Usually a structured piece of writing with some expected kind of formats and styles, focused on a question and aligned with a syllabus that your teacher is hopefully helping you understand, the expected knowledge that you need to engage with as part of the HSC syllabus. The essay is designed to display your knowledge, to display critical skills, but also because the HSC essay, you get some time to work on it, you can respond to feedback. So you may get the chance for several drafts. So usually you're expecting a more polished text, an argument in the take-home essay, one that responds to feedback as well. Now, thinking for a moment about the teachers, and maybe the teachers and the markers are in the presentation here today as well, reflecting on their own position in this rhetorical situation. I've described you very nicely as expert, curriculum-obsessed, university-trained academic writers. But essentially people who have come through the university system, they've been trained in a particular structure and style and type of academic writing or scholarly writing and argumentation, and they're looking for similar kinds of writing in marking their assignments. So this maps out a little bit of the rhetorical situation. You could go further and put more specific fine points on this in each particular subject, in each particular scenario that arises where you have to write. So moving on to the next slide, let's look at a very slight adjustment here in thinking about the exam scenario. I've kept you as the author the same on this map. You have the same experiences, the same understanding and critical skills, ambition, and so on. But when we look at the essay, there's a slight change here in that in the time pressure of an exam scenario, you won't be responding to feedback and refining your writing and revising your draft as much. So rather than say that the text or the message itself is a polished form of communication, I've said there are some discourse conventions or expected patterns in the writing that might come up in an exam, and I'll elaborate on that in a moment. But also with the examiners or teachers / markers, your audience for this particular piece of writing, it's interesting to think of them as people snowed under huge piles of writing and reading the same kind of response to the same kind of question again. So this time they're working through large piles of marking, and a particular question you might have is how you can stand apart or stand out from the crowd in that way. So moving on to the next slide, I've just brainstormed a few things that differentiate the essay from the, let's say, the long form of writing in an exam scenario. But I'd like to invite you now to share in the Zoom Q&A some of the differences between that take-home essay or the exam scenario essay that you might produce in your HSC. And I'll read some of those out as they come in. Okay, so one of the first responses is less stressful. That's possibly referring to the essay rather than the exam as less stressful. I know without the time pressure, there can be less stress. That's good. Less time to bounce off ideas. That's a really great answer there. In the exam, it's very difficult to sort of explore fully and flesh out counterpoints and ideas and bounce different ideas around as well. The knowledge of the question for the assessment versus the unseen question. That's right. So in an essay, you have more familiarity with the question. You can tease apart the intricacies and the complexities. But in an exam scenario, you and everyone else, hopefully, have just seen the question, and you'll need to respond to it on the fly or by the seat of your pants. So that's great. There are some really good answers coming in here. We can think about how the clarity of your thoughts might change between these two scenarios, how the exam asks you to produce fast writing and fast thinking and how you negotiate or manage that. So excellent answers coming in. We could probably spend another half an hour just unpacking these great ideas, because the collective wisdom here is actually pointing to so much more of the intricacies of those two different rhetorical situations than I can possibly do in a few minutes here. So thank you all for your contributions there. Some of the other ones there are about evidence, more and less evidence across essays and exams. So there may be an expectation in essays to use more evidence. The longer and the shorter forms of writing, so in an exam you might actually not be able to write 800 words in 50 minutes or whatever different expectations might be, so you need to get to the point quicker, and how much we rely on formulas or structures of writing. In time pressure is a big one that I'd like to focus on. So I might just go to the next slide now. Thank you. So when you're writing an essay, we can ask this question: what does time give you? The chance to find and use higher quality evidence, more specific and relevant evidence as well that relates directly to the question. So you're not taking long leaps of logic to connect a quote to the question or your argument, that you find something closer. A more reasoned and considered claim that can tease out the intricacies and so on of a topic, thinking about counterpoints as well. We would expect probably clearer writing because there's more of an opportunity to proof, to edit, to organise and present professionally the writing. But the response to feedback is really important. So I know that teachers work really well to give you feedback and ideas for what you might respond to and change in your writing. So writing multiple drafts in a longer form kind of essay that you take home. So I just thought that one tip here to make the most of the essay is to draft. And by that I mean present early ideas and formulate ideas before the due date if possible, to seek feedback and to revise. And if you do that, you give yourself the best chance at capitalizing on the time that you're given for an essay as opposed to an exam. Let's think about the exam scenario. What does a time limit do to your writing? Well, you're juggling a lot in an exam. You're probably looking at the clock. You're thinking about whether your pencil is sharp enough or your pen's going to work or whatever the case may be. You know, there's a lot going on. So what tends to happen is a lot of things drop off our thinking and our ability to respond on the spot. So we want to limit the kind of complexities that we have. And that often means that the structure of our writing will become more formulaic. We follow simpler patterns, like an intro, body, conclusion, simple pattern for an essay. Or there may even be patterns that you're taught for paragraphs where you have a topic sentence, you bring in some evidence, you analyze the evidence and you create a link. If you do that in longer take-home assessments, you create a kind of boring, predictable style of writing. But in an exam, that takes one decision off your plate and you're able to sort of work more quickly and get to the point as much as possible. So it's useful to rely on more formulaic styles of writing in an exam time sensitive kind of writing. A simpler argument, as somebody mentioned, you need to quickly adapt to the keywords of a question. You've only just seen it. So you might need to plan and adjust how a big idea you already hold could be adjusted to that question on the spot. Less polished writing, though I did have a writing teacher in high school who gave me great advice to allow some time at the end of your exam to go back and do a little bit of proofreading, and that can be something you can do as well. But also thinking about how the time limit creates a kind of larger pack. And what I mean by that is if everyone's relying on the same kind of formulas and creating a simpler argument, there's a kind of larger set of predictable, predictable answers with less variability between those answers. So to make the most of that scenario, there still needs to be some planning, there needs to be some adaptation, but we need to stand out And that's a really hard question to answer. How do you stand out in a time-sensitive rhetorical situation for writing? So the next slide here is about finding your voice. And I get the opportunity here to engage with some research that I love looking into in my work at the university, which is the research of cultural rhetorics, where scholars such as Malia Powell and her collaborators, who are based in the US, we have Indigenous women, African-American women contributing to this article on cultural rhetorics. And they tell us, when you seek to find your voice, if you're not telling a story, you're not doing it right. And I love this piece of advice because it helps us think about what makes us unique as writers and how we can bring our experiences into a rhetorical situation. So techniques from cultural rhetoric theory tell us that excellent ways to distinguish ourselves as writers include using anecdotes and image-based analogies. You could map some of these back to Susan's slide and think about these as strategies of pathos or logos or ethos used in different ways. Connecting with your own experience, and I highly recommend you practice and think about how even in an exam scenario, you can briefly connect to your own experience, perhaps in the introduction and conclusion of an exam answer, to really lift the answer up and make it seem unique and individual. And consider using those moments to tell a story of personal relevance about why this question is actually important to you and why whatever claim or argument you've put forward about Macbeth or health studies in PDHPE or cardiovascular disease, why has your point in a long answer, even in a time-bound situation, helped you think about the future of the world and what you can achieve? So if I could change one thing about universities, it would be that we become more welcoming by allowing students to connect more with their own stories. And that's why I do this research in cultural rhetorics, but also you have the opportunity as a writer in the HSC to begin that process and find ways to connect to the material you're writing about. So with the next slide here, I'd like to introduce Dr. Chris Hartney. Chris has been around with writing studies since the beginning and has been a trusted kind of friend of writing studies. He's the chair of discipline for studies of religion at the University of Sydney. And he's going to guide you through what happens after the HSC as you develop your writing at university. So thank you, Chris, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Ben. Could we go, yes, to the next slide? I suppose I want to make an appeal to pathos as well. When I first came to university, and like Ben, I was out of the New South Wales education system from Condell Park High School out at Bankstown. And when I arrived, I found university life to be very confusing because I was a really good communicator, but I was able to communicate really well orally, through speech, through talking. I was a star at tutorials and speaking with my peers, but my essays were really problematic. And I think part of that was because I was coming at writing from a speaking perspective when I should have been coming at it from a writing perspective. Now, I'm going to, I should also say I'm from the Department of Studies in Religion. Don't worry about that. That's the critical examination of religion. It's not theology, so I'm not here to convert you today. But I'm going to kind of stand up against some of the things that Susan and Ben have said, in that the appeal to ethos and the appeal through story is something that is a part of argument. Indeed it is, but sometimes we need to give up on narrative, particularly when we're moving into first year, when we're trying to demonstrate in the humanities and in the hard sciences with arguments that are critical assessments of our sources. And I suppose the great appeal when you're writing at a university level is not that appeal to pathos, but it is more an appeal to authority. It's an appeal to scholars who've gone before you, who have thought about a particular subject, and then you want to capture their thinking and their arguments and expand on it. and develop it. And that is part of the scholarly tradition that we have been living with since the first universities started going up in Western Europe in the 10 and 1100s. So you've got to be careful when you're writing at a more academic level that you're fitting everything into a narrative. Rather, you should be trying to fit everything into an argument. In this direction, you need to avoid that sort of journalistic mode of short form journalism where you're just saying when, how, who, where, and why, but move to picking up on a particular controversial point in particular, something that might have two sides to it, showing that you understand the validity of both of those sides, but really attempting to move towards arguing that one of those interpretations of the events is more reasonable and is more justifiable than others. So you've got to keep away from narrative to an extent. You've got to keep away from the journalistic in its short form modality. Sometimes you might come across in The Guardian an article or even the Good Weekend magazine in the Herald where the article might be 4,000 or 5,000 words long. Long form journalism tends to be far more investigative and far more scholarly. You've got to be careful of writing in an analytic modality where you just line things up chronologically. That doesn't necessarily help an argument. You've got to be wary of being chatty, wary of being too informal or too oral, which I was when I first came to university. You've got to be careful of being overly discursive, and you've got to know your audience, and your audience are going to be other scholars who are looking forward to you presenting yourself as a scholar in the making. And if there's one thing I want to stress more than anything else, it's that at first year, the essays that we tend to assess, the presentations that we're looking at, can be quite awful from time to time. They can be just genuinely bad. And then something amazing happens during the break between first year and second year. And then something else amazing happens between the break between second year and third year. And there's nothing I love more than reading third year essays, because so many of these issues have been confronted, students have dealt with them, and they start writing like scholarly angels, you might say. But along the way, you should be critical, you should be efficient in your language use, you should be suspicious of the sources that you're using, always be critical of them, and use sources that help you build a direct line of argument rather than a narrative. Be clearly structured in what you're doing. Use academic references. Keep making those appeals to authority, to major scholarly contributors in the field. And if you have a critical assessment of those authority figures, if you want to take on Karl Marx and show how he's wrong, take on the great founder of sociology, Emil Durkheim, and show how he's wrong, and that you've got a good argument for that, then we're going to be even more impressed. And also in your writing, and this is for the HSC as much as it is in university, give clear indicators to the reader of where you're going. For example, now that I've spoken about ideas of the academic genre, let me turn to the atmosphere of academic writing itself. So what is the scholarly atmosphere? And it's there when you look at scholars talking on YouTube, and it's certainly here when you come to university. You begin to engage with levels of discourse that are significantly more complicated, harder to get into. There are articles that are hard to read in the first instance, books that are hard to read, but there are tricks you can use. You can read reviews of those books. You can look at how other people are talking about those books as a way of getting into these texts. But when you're in a discipline, whether it's English or writing studies or studies in religion or history or philosophy, you're going to start picking up who are the authorities that the people around you are referring to. In philosophy, a lot of people are going to be talking about Hegel and Heidegger and Nietzsche, and maybe a lot of people you haven't heard of this far in your life, but they're the sort of authority figures that form a canon of names that we keep referring back to. So when you're in your subject, you need to listen out very carefully to what theorists are being discussed, which persons are creating the major influences in your field, what language is being used and what the level of that language is, how lecturers and tutors demonstrate their competency to you through communication as well, and do crazy obsessive things like stalk them on their staff web pages, find out what interests them, speak with them. Ask them what they think is important, because just as you have a working relationship with your teachers, so too when you come to university, we want to, as lecturers, have working relationships with you that enable you to do the best research and form the best arguments that you can. Can we go to the next slide, where I'm going to explain to you how I fixed this incredible inability of me to write properly? And the key to it was to work in the shadow of Ernest Hemingway, because if you pick up a novel by Hemingway, you will see that he writes incredibly short sentences. He doesn't write sentences that have clauses and subclauses. He doesn't write sentences that seem chatty or lengthily drawn out. All of his sentences are incredibly short. So I'm suggesting that if you want to improve your style, look at a little bit of Ernest Hemingway's writings, novels, for example, such as The Old Man and the Sea, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and find this efficiency of writing that he has that becomes something that will power you forward. And here I've put the devil, which is Marcus Tullius Cicero, a new man in Rome who was very full of himself and who loved using all the words and loved using lots of subclauses in his sentences. There are some sentences by Marcus Tullius Cicero that go for 1 to 2.5 pages, and you've got to swim through that verbiage to find his main clause and make sense of his sentence. The trick is be like Papa Hemingway. And the next slide demonstrates this even more clearly. Because there's the internet, because people go looking for help in a whole range of areas that are digital these days, they forget about this wonderful sacred system of ancient knowledge, which comes in the form of a book. And one of the great books in terms of how to develop your style as a clear arguer on the page is to look at this great book, which is Elements of Style by Strunk and White. I'm sure you could find it absolutely anywhere and get it downloaded to your Kindle. It's American, but it's about hyper efficiency in language, and it's about no-nonsense language use. And I think Strunk and White are very closely related to Ernest Hemingway and his very simple style. Don't use the passive voice, don't use complicated subclauses and so forth. Just simply put down one sentence and then put down another sentence and see how you build your argument for that. Another hint that I'd love to let you know about is if you go into Word and you go into Review, there is a button you can click that will read your writing back to you with a voice. How amazing it is to hear what you have written read back to you from an external device. Now, this works if you give your writing to anyone in your world. The very physical fact of handing over your cherished piece of writing to another person, like even if I thought, having written an article, maybe Ben or Susan would like to read it, drives a little fear, a little shot of fear through me. Have I communicated the most effectively that I can? And what on earth would Ben and Susan think of the writing that I've put down on this page? So even thinking about giving your writing to somebody else to have a look at is a great critical process. But that little button in Word in the review section that reads back to you your prose, and you can hear where you've made spelling mistakes, where you've made grammatical errors, where something just doesn't sound right and you need to rearrange your sentence. These tricks are absolutely wonderful, and I really encourage you to use them. Stephen King, the great American horror novelist, thinks that Strunk and White is the best thing ever written. So take his advice as well as mine. This is a little bit more esoteric, but I just wanted to drop this on you, that sometimes if you have a language at home that is different from English, if you have an interest in other languages, then this is a great way of comparing the way language operates. And again, back to an appeal to pathos. I really didn't understand how English grammar worked until I did a degree in Latin, and it so set up an opposition between how one language worked and how English worked that I started to really get into an understanding of English grammar and how you could use a clause, a subclause, how you could use gerundival words and a whole range of other things to make the best sense that you possibly could. So think about other language study if that's something that interests you, because it will really help you also with your English as well. Then we come to the big, scary bear in the room. And it's the idea of footnoting or referencing. Because we're making appeals to authority, because we're making appeals back to scholars who came before us, we need to reference those scholars, so that we need to have a system that shows our reader that we have gone through text A and we have found on page 69 this most excellent quote. In order to note that you have got this from a specific book, you really need another book to show you how to do that. And here I'm going to lay on you the Chicago Manual of Style. It's up to its 17th edition. This is the book that shows you how to reference everything. Other books, articles, lecture notes, podcasts, YouTube videos. Everything that you need to footnote is in some way listed in this book. Now, of course, going out and reading this book might take you the entire duration of your university degree. So better than reading this book is to click on this link here, www.chicagomanualofstyle.org, which takes you to a very brief one-page summary of how to reference. And that referencing has what we call in-text referencing, where you open a bracket at the end of the quote and you put in the author and the date and close the bracket. It also has referencing where you put a little subscript number at the end of your quote, and then down at the bottom of the page in a smaller font appears the author of the book, the title and the page number where you got that quote from. So in my eagerness to convince you that coming to university is a great idea, I also want to say to you that even now you should be getting used to the idea of referencing, even in your HSC answer where you're saying, in George Orwell's novel we saw, or in Act 4, Scene 2 of Hamlet, we find the following soliloquy. All of these things demonstrate one thing more than anything else, and that is that if you are quoting ideas that you have read, your reader will not assume that you are trying to claim that idea as your own. And this is how we avoid plagiarism, which is one of the great accusations of bad behavior in the university. We need to demonstrate that the ideas we're using are either our own unique ideas or they're ideas that have come from somewhere else. And to do that, we use referencing. So I'm not going to go through this entire slide, but there are some hints here for what you can do to improve the way that you argue a point. And the second point over here on the left is the big thing that I want you to focus on. It's a book by Lunsworth, Ruskowitz, and Walters, and it's called Everything is an Argument. And the reason why I know about this book is because people like Ben and Susan tend to not shut up about it. It's a great textbook that gives you an extremely clear view of how to structure an argument within the modality of an academic argument. So there are some resources there that I really want you to engage with. The next slide after this is some even more important resources, but I also want to talk about, just quickly before I go, the importance of your second paragraph. Now, your introductory paragraph and your conclusion state the opening of your argument, what you will argue and what you hope to achieve. Your conclusion will say, I have given you all of this evidence that builds up to an argument that demonstrates that I have made a good argument and that this argument is worth taking note of. But then there's the second paragraph, and here in this second paragraph, you are doing such things as letting the reader know how you will address the question, what is the scope of the question, and what methodology you will be using. But methodology is the process by which you are answering the question. Will you be taking an historical approach? Will you be using the tools that have been given to us by sociology? And some of you have come up against sociological method already in Society and Culture, which is a society-based, sociologically based course, anthropological processes and so forth. Now, I'm telling you about these things not because you need to master them right now, but because when you come to university, these are the sorts of things that you're going to be presented with, and being pre-prepared is in a way being pre-warned is being pre-prepared. So keep these things in the back of your mind as you come towards us. We are so excited by the fact that so many people now who finish the HSC are thinking of doing university work. It's a challenge at the start because there are conventions that we are going to lay on you, but once you get the process of those conventions, you join this amazing conversation that has been held by scholars for the last 1,000 years about how we can describe what reality is and how we can argue about, as Ben says, the future and what that future is that is going to be best for the maximum number of us, for the ultimate benefit of our species. And that is why we do what we do. The final slide is just a list of resources. Again, Chicago Manual of Style. There's also, for those of you who have been excited by the prospect of referencing, but also overwhelmed by footnoting and the need to trace the origins of your ideas back to sources, there are two standout referencing managing systems that you can just download for free online. They are EndNote and Zotero. And if you're thinking about a university career, I would suggest you look more into them. My favorite one is Zotero. It basically means you put in a reference once and it is there in a database so that you can footnote from that source for all eternity. So always ask your tutors, teachers, lecturers for help and advice. What sources would you expect in an answer to such a question? And get as deeply as you can, even though you're at a HSC level, as deeply as you can into this atmosphere of scholarly attitudes towards justifying the arguments that you're going to make in your writing. Thank you. Now I get to throw back to Susan, who's put a little slide together for you that summarizes some of the things that we've been trying to get across in this session. Thank you, Susan.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So thinking about, how we can apply the rhetorical situation. So I was sitting here thinking as Chris was speaking and as Ben was speaking about how we think of these, somewhat restrictive situations. We think about HSC writing or class writing or assignment writing in high school. And we think about, academic writing, essay writing at university. And these are both rhetorical constructs. They're rhetorical situations that we need to think about. And I think we can still break those down. And while, we may not be able to use lots of emotion in our own writing, we can still attempt to have an emotional response of the reader. And I'm not saying that we need to make them cry or laugh or whatever when they read our writing, but we need to think about what will make them want to read more, what will position them favorably to give me a good mark. What can I do to do the best I can in this exercise? So it's kind of like making lemonade from lemons. If you don't like timed writing, if you don't like exam writing, and let's face it, who does? I've never set an exam in 20 years in higher education because I don't believe in them, because it doesn't produce the best writing. But we have to do it in the HSC, right? You have to do it. The government decides what we have to do. But you'll get a little more freedom at university. But no matter which context you're writing in or which rhetorical situation you find yourself in, there are just a few things. And well, I say a few, there's a long list of things here. But I think the first one is the most important and the last one. Know yourself as a writer And remember that writing is always imperfect and unfinished. So I have PhD students who produce these beautiful, long theses, and they're thinking, wow, I'm done. And I'm thinking, no, you're just beginning because you're going to turn this into a book. It's the start, so you might feel, oh, I finished high school, or I'm starting uni, or I finished this class at uni. This is such a great feeling, but there's always something around the corner. Be aware of other voices, but find your own authentic voice. I've done an experiment now every year when I'm teaching a writing class, and I'll ask my colleagues, to if it's not anonymous submissions, which we use a lot at uni, I'll ask someone to hide the names, and I'll say, okay, without fail, if I have 20 students, I can usually say at least 16 of them, that's so and so, that's this person, that's this person, because I've become so used to their voice, their writing style, that I can determine who that is. And you also want to know where to go for help when you need it. And so this might be a writing center, this might be a colleague, a family member, but it's a really powerful thing to be able to put your writing into your own words, that someone who doesn't know anything about the class you're taking, or your background or your discipline can understand it. And that's a great litmus test to know whether you're making sense. It's whether someone who's outside that particular rhetorical situation can comment on it. And be open to feedback, and see feedback as a good thing and an opportunity to grow. And learn how to map your writing onto this rhetorical triangle to check the balance of your appeals. Are you being too emotional? Are you just saying things like, we should do this because of X, and it's based on your opinion rather than facts or sources like Chris was talking about? And if you're using sources, are you using them responsibly? Are you borrowing? Are you forgetting to cite? That is a flaw of ethos. It reflects poorly on your credibility. Just like you're having a conversation, if you're in a room with 3 people, and you introduce one person and don't introduce the other, it's very rude, and it seems rude and wrong. And the same is true with your sources. You need to refer to each one that you have used or borrowed from. And as long as you do that, there's no problem. But it's really about just understanding the process of writing and what you're trying to get out of it. There's no right way to do it, and I don't have that written on here anyway, but just remember that it's never finished, because we can always improve on something, we can always expand something, we can always adapt it to a different situation. One of the exercises I use in my classes is having students adapt, for example, a journal article into a tweet. Or they adapt an email or a section of an essay. When we think of memes, one of my favorites is Darth Vader reading The Raven. So taking material from one context to another is really powerful. So writing's never finished. Thinking's never finished. And for me, writing is an extension of thought. People often say, what do you think about this? And I say, I don't really know until I've written about it. And I really mean that. So we hope that this has been useful. We hope that this is a little list that you can keep with you. If you're feeling discouraged about your writing, don't be. There's always help around the corner. There are plenty of places you can turn. If you don't know about it already, Purdue University has a free online writing center called the Purdue OWL, OWL is the acronym, Online Writing Lab. And you can get answers to just about anything you need to know about your writing there. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and we hope to see you at the University of Sydney in the near future in religious studies or the discipline of English and writing, yes, or any other discipline, taking one of our writing classes. So thanks so much for joining us, and all the best.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. Greatly appreciated. I know we've had a few Q&A questions. I know, Ben, you're answering one at the moment. Did you want to answer on that one live?
Yeah, happy to, actually. It'll save me typing the answer. So there's a question here about how to confront the issue where students sometimes feel reluctant to hand in an unfinished, imperfect piece of writing. And I was thinking the question might have come from a teacher. So I was responding to what teachers can do in the classroom in that regard. An activity I actually love to run in most of my writing classrooms is I get students to write something, it could be an answer to the question, what is rhetoric, on a scrap of paper, and then they scrunch it up and they throw it around the room, and they have a bit of a snowball fight and then eventually share someone else's answer. And it works for a number of reasons. There's less it breaks attachment to writing. It helps normalize the sharing of draft writing in the classroom. And these kind of activities are really useful for teachers who need to help students overcome that anxiety that I think is natural and all of us feel about sharing that not quite finished piece of writing. And for students, I would say if you feel that sense of anxiety, seek out opportunities on early drafts of your writing. And when you find that you're getting supportive feedback, hopefully it will start to normalize, as I say, that feeling of being able to share without being too hurt by the process.
Thank you so much for that one. One of the questions that's coming through is how to deal with the issue in an exam of having knowledge but writing that doesn't really make sense in the moment.
Susan, do you have anything on that question about when you receive a piece of writing where there's a good idea but the style isn't quite expressing the idea? What are some tips for people there?
Yes. Okay, I've just found this, how to deal with the issue in an exam of having knowledge but writing what doesn't make sense. So if you feel you know the answer, but you're not putting it in a way that it's very, I never did well in exams. It's very hard, like Ben alluded to earlier. You're already in a pressured situation and you're thinking, you know, how do I do this? My best advice there would be to put it in your own words, to try to explain what you know, to get it out there first, to demonstrate what you know, and then maybe go back over it like Ben had mentioned earlier. Take some time and read back through and then insert the keywords. Don't try to do it the opposite. Don't try to kind of think, oh, I've got to use all these keywords, because if you're thinking, oh, I need to do this, you're going to get more nervous. It's better, I think, if you can, and if it's in a, you know, if you're using a computer to do it, you're not doing it longhand and having to cross things out. Or even if you are, maybe take one space of it and just kind of jot down the things you know, or maybe dot point the salient you know, facts or the key issues, and then go back and try to kind of massage that, as I like to think, into something with flow. Worry about, you know, fixing it up later. Worry about the style, worry about inserting the keywords later. But I'd say the most important thing is to get down what you know on the page, because that's how you're demonstrating your knowledge, and to worry about, you know, fitting the format afterwards. So if that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And the last question that we have is from Tyler, saying that they're currently doing creative writing. Do you have any tips or anything for it relating back to the reader or keeping them engaged?
I'm not really a creative writing expert, but I guess my best, Ben or Chris might want to jump in here.
If I could jump in,
the best.
I'd like to say
Yeah,
to Tyler that sometimes the best way of working out how you can deeply appeal to other people with your writing is to form a group of writers. It's a community-based. I mean, there are so many answers. The most obvious, of course, is to read absolutely everything you can get your hands on. But one of them, in a more immediate sense, is to join a writing group or do as many creative writing courses as you can through adult education or any organization like that that's going to enable you to make connections with other creative writers. I think that is the true path forward, and that's one of the geniuses of Ben and Susan's department, is that they do have a creative writing section with some very professional and very well published fiction writers who teach here at Sydney and at other universities across Australia, very serious and investigative creative writing courses. But I would say that the best way is to share your writing and to get deep responses from other people who are also deeply into fictional writing and writing that makes particular emotional and intellectual appeals to audience. Yeah. Ben,
Excellent.
you want to add something?
Yeah, just the creative writing at the University of Sydney follows a workshop pedagogy, which is all about sharing and giving feedback on drafts. So I'll just back up that point that you've made, Chris, and just say that even though our perception is often that creative writing is like spur of the moment, you know, intuitive style of writing, it's often really carefully planned, in fact, and using all of those kind of strategies that Susan mentioned earlier as well, to think about the audience, to think about the appeals you can make to engage that particular audience, and planning out the creative writing as much as you would an essay is a really important tip there as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your questions and to our panel for their answers. If you also wish to stay up to date with any upcoming opportunities and events that we offer, you could also sign up to the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences Participate High School newsletter. This is designed specifically for high school students and teachers, so please feel free to subscribe to that one as well. As we know, you're heading into the school holidays, but also potentially the HSC trials in early term 3. I just wanted to bring your attention to the first QR code on the left. This is where we post all the recordings from previous articulate talks and also anything that our academics are doing relating to high school subjects. So that's English and HSC, PD Health PE, creative and performing arts, as well as languages. So that's where we put podcasts and any other resources on that file, on that web page there. And I also want to say that in term 3, we're very excited to introduce articulate visual arts and also community and family studies for the first time. So you can go through and have a look by scanning the QR codes there for your reference. And on that note, I just wanted to say thank you so much for attending. We hope you found this session helpful, and a massive thank you to our presenters as well for tonight, and to Charlotte for monitoring everything in the background. Thank you so much. Best of luck with everything. Hope you have a lovely night, and we hope to see you again very soon.